Since 2017, Riverdale has been one of the most popular binge-watch-worthy shows on Netflix. But did you know it all started with the 1939 comics? The characters didn't really look the same, but stay tuned to see which character had a drastic makeover. Don't forget to subscribe to The Things and give this video a big thumbs up. Now let's check out the cast of Riverdale and their comic book characters. Archie Andrews. Let's start with the character that is arguably one of the most popular characters in the series. In the comic books, Archie still has his gorgeous red hair. In fact, the Archie you see in Riverdale and the Archie from the comic books are actually both quite similar. We all know the Riverdale version of Archie as the boy that loves to just go for it without ever thinking about any consequences. Some people might call him a typical boy, with a certain description in front of the word boy we're not allowed to repeat. But Archie in the comic books is slightly more lovable. He's shown as the typical teenager, and he first appeared in the Archie Comics in 1941. Just like the Riverdale version, this Archie also wants to impress the girls at any chance he gets. But he is also super clumsy and relatable, which makes him that much more appealing. No offense to the Riverdale's Archie. Looks-wise, they kind of look the same, except for the fact that Archie definitely wasn't this buff and athletic. Guess eating all that protein and sticking to your macronutrients really does pay off, right? And in case you're wondering, the love triangle is still there in the comics. Betty Cooper. Where do we even start with Betty? She's definitely the smartest of the mysterious little town and knows what's up when something's up. Betty has had plenty of good moments on the show, but if you love her character, you should definitely read the comics. She's also super relatable, and she still has a crush on Archie. In the comics, Betty is more into sports than just cheerleading, but she's also a scuba diver, and she's really into making her own clothing. Just like her TV version, the comic version of Betty has an above-average intelligence, and she's one of the smartest students at Riverdale. Take that, blonde stereotypes. Looks-wise, Betty's character is still blonde in the comics. Her eyes are sometimes described as blue and sometimes as brown, which is perfect because the TV Betty Cooper's eyes are a mix of every color. But the main difference is in her emotional state. We know the TV version of Betty comes with a lot of childhood baggage, but that baggage isn't there in the comics. In fact, she's extremely loving and always willing to help everyone at all times. And in case you want to know, the rivalry between Betty and Veronica is still there. Veronica Lodge. And here she is, the one you love to hate. There's no one quite like Veronica Lodge, but in the TV show, Veronica's hair is black, and in the comics, her hair is brown. She also has medium-length hair, complete with bangs, which is something we never see on the TV version. But this Veronica is just as spoiled, and she's always concerned about her appearance. Crazy about shopping and designer clothes, she's known to max out her father's credit cards. The TV version of Veronica does have a lot of fashion sense, but it seems that only the comic book version uses that passion. She's extremely knowledgeable on clothing, and she also frequently models. It's also revealed that the comic book version of Veronica is good at math and economics, which is something that's never revealed on the show. Well, except for the time when she helped Chuck with his math problem over the phone. The comic book version also named Veronica as one of the prettiest girls in town, and at some point she even ranked as number 87 in the Comics Buyer's Guide, 100 Sexiest Women in Comics list. Someone needs to do the popular Karma Challenge and do a comic book version of Veronica versus the TV version. Jughead Jones. Alright, it's time to talk about the one and only Jughead Jones. In the show, Jughead has black hair and blue eyes, but in the comics, he has black hair and black eyes. In the comics, Jughead's intelligence constantly changes depending on the story. He's sometimes known as a bit slow, but he's also shown to be really smart. In the show, Jughead is most known for his writing skills that allow him to tell the tale of the Riverdale town, but those writing skills don't exist in the comics. The comic version of Jughead also shows him as an always hungry dude whose brain actually can't survive unless he's constantly munching on food. The comic version of Jughead also had a dog called Hot Dog, who vaguely appears in the 13th episode of Riverdale. But the biggest change of them all is the fact that Jughead and Archie were actually best friends in the comics, which only makes you think about the stereotypical status quo the TV show had to make. We kind of wish the TV show would keep them as friends though, because we have a feeling the true story would take a completely different turn. In one of the comic books, Jughead also becomes completely obsessed with the skateboarding culture. Reggie Mantle. And then there's Reggie. He's a bit of a hit and miss with the Riverdale's fandom because, let's be honest, he doesn't really bring much to the table apart from being the typical jock. On the show, he's best known for selling the jingle jangle to high schoolers, if you know what we mean. But in the comic books, Reggie's a slightly different character. Well, apart from his looks, because he actually looks almost the same as his comic book version. The comic book version is still very much into sports, but he's also a real Casanova and always seems to date other women. He's not only a jock, but a pretty well-rounded athlete, and he even does kung fu. While Reggie might not be a beloved character in the series, he seems to be very much beloved in the comics. Well, at least beloved by himself. You see, Reggie has a nickname called Reggie, I Love Me, Mantle, and you can commonly see him with a comb looking at himself in the mirror. Typical jock stuff, isn't it? He's also a seasonal prankster, although his pranks always seem to backfire. The comic book version of Reggie is also Archie's arch nemesis, so he definitely brings more to the table. CHERYL Blossom. First of all, CHERYL Blossom sounds like she could be in the Powerpuff Girls, if there was an evil and manipulative Powerpuff Girl out there. The comic version of CHERYL looks fairly similar, except for the fact that CHERYL's eyes in the Archie comics are green, not brown. The CHERYL in the comics is much more manipulative, but she also seems to have a caring side, depending on the story. And unlike Riverdale's CHERYL, she's not a cheer captain. In fact, there's no mention of her being involved in any after-school activities. Well, apart from the whole Archie thing, if that counts. Her character is actually so similar, the original story also implies there was something going on between her and her brother. The implications were subtle, but obvious enough to make CHERYL's character disappear from the comics for a while because it was just too much for the readers. But there's one thing the Riverdale version of CHERYL has that this one doesn't. It's her relationship with Heather, that was just briefly mentioned in the show, but gained quite a lot of attention. Of course, that's totally expected considering the times, but it would have been an interesting backstory to CHERYL's Riverdale character. Kevin Keller. Seriously, who doesn't love Kevin? Well, if you love his dark hair, it might surprise you because he has blonde hair in the comics. He also has light green eyes on the show and blue eyes in the comics. The comic version of Kevin is also much more muscular and built, as if he'd been heavily into sports, although that's never the highlight of his story. It's also revealed that Veronica has a thing for Kevin, but he's totally uninterested. And get this, it's also revealed that he's gay in the comics. Yep. Kevin was the first openly gay character in the Archie comics. For that reason, his character wasn't introduced until 2010. In the 2012 comic titled Life with Archie, Kevin also gets married. And we don't want to break your heart, but you should probably know that he doesn't end up with Mason. It seems that his future is just as bright in the comics as it is on the actual show. Kevin's a beloved and revolutionary character, and the fans of both the comics and the show want to see more characters like him. After all, we all love characters we can actually relate with. So it makes sense, right? Josie and the Pussycats. And who can forget the pussycats that have to claw their way into a room people can just normally walk into? Of course, Josie and the Pussycats were slightly more developed in the Archie comics than they were in Riverdale. So much so that they had their own storyline that later got transformed into a Sunday morning cartoon. And while Melody and Valerie don't really do much on Riverdale, Melanie was the one that co-founded the group in the comics. But what's different about the TV version of the girls is the fact that Josie is the one that's black, while Melody is black in the comics. In fact, Melody was the first black reoccurring character in an American cartoon. The comics also rebooted the band in 2016. Josie's also the character that's the most different in the comics. She's much nicer and kinder to just about everyone she meets. For some reason, the girls have very mysterious last names in the comic book version, with Valerie being the only one we know. But overall, the girls still look the same in the comics as they do on the TV screen. And yep, the iconic cat ears are still there. Moose Mason. Moose is a typical jock, probably even more typical than Archie. In the comics, he's the one that's usually dim-witted, but completely good-hearted. He's kind to everyone, as long as people don't mess with his girlfriend. Yep, that's right. In the comics, Moose's girlfriend, Midge, is the highlight of his story, and the two are very happy together. Moose is also blonde in the comics, and his muscles are out of this world. Seriously, the TV version of Moose can't even compare. Moose on screen is also much more of a complex and dark character, while the comic book version would never hurt a fly. But the main difference difference between the two characters is the fact that the comic book version of Moose isn't secretly gay at all. His interactions with Kevin aren't even present. In the comics, Moose's slow demeanor was later also revealed to be dyslexia, which is something the show never mentions. In fact, now that we think about it, Moose's intelligence isn't a big focus on the show at all. And although his TV version is much more complex and slightly dark, we do prefer his TV complexity over his simple and straight-to-the-point character in the comic books. Miss Grundy. So let's talk about one of arguably the worst characters this show has ever had. At least that's what people say whenever they rank Riverdale characters. Miss Grundy doesn't really have a good rep, but why should she, considering she had an affair with an underage student? Well, that plotline doesn't really exist in the comics, but that's because Miss Grundy is really old, like white hair old. And because she's a much better person on her TV counterpart, the comics show her as a grumpy old teacher that doesn't like her students being late. She takes no nonsense, and she absolutely doesn't think Archie is worthy of her attention in any other way other than school stuff. Way to go, Miss Grundy! In the comics, Miss Grundy also gets married to the Riverdale high school principal, and overall, she sounds like a much better person. Well, apart from the fact that she's this strict teacher no student would really like in real life. But hey, that's normal, right? If the two versions of Miss Grundy are so different, does that really count as the same character? She was practically reinvented on the show, but it looks like the team lost the plot with this one. And that's all for our video. Who's your favorite Riverdale character? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you next time.